Hello, my name is Scott Richardson, and I'm going to be talking about criminological theory today. I'll start off by talking about it generally, and then I'll talk about a particular criminological theory, that is social control theory. First off, let's talk about what a theory is. Theory is basically an explanation for why the world works the way that it does. It's predicated on the notion that human behavior is fairly orderly and predictable. If you understand some of the common causes of something, you're better able to understand why it happens and when it will happen. Now, first off, a theory is a set of logically interrelated propositions that are designed to explain a particular topic. In our case, we're talking about why people commit crime, or why they don't, or why they behave in deviant manners or deviant fashions. So a theory tries to model some slice of reality, but theories are necessarily incomplete. They cannot explain every possible cause of why something happens or why it doesn't happen. Real life is obviously too complex for that. Now, because theories are incomplete and always incorrect to some extent, they're never directly tested. Rather, it is the hypotheses that a theory generates that allows us to test a theory and to determine the extent to which it's correct and accurate. And even a good theory may only account for 40 or maybe 50% of the variance in a set of data about crime. Now, what are some of the characteristics of a good theory? One is that it explains the data. Suppose that we had a data set about maybe religiosity and crime, and our theory suggested that when people are more active in a religion, they're less inclined to commit crime. Well, if that theory is correct, then you would expect to find it true in the data. In other words, if I have a theory and go collect data about that theory to test it, if the theory is accurate to any extent, I would find that in data. So it explains the data. It makes sense of things. It makes sense of the relationships. What came first and what came second? What are the causes of something? What are the consequences? Theories do that. Now, theories predict future events. That's another point. If I understand why people may commit crime or why young people may be involved in delinquency, a theory is going to allow me to predict the future. So, for instance, if labeling matters, if young people who have been stigmatized and accepted a label of criminal are more inclined to commit crime, then that ought to be true in the future with other people, not just the current data. Third, hypotheses need to be tested, and a theory has to generate these sorts of hypotheses. It has to be testable. Now, of course, in many cases, it's not entirely clear how you test a theory because you need to conceptualize the theoretical concepts in a way that are measurable. So, for instance, social control theory. If I said that attachment matters, we'll talk about that later, then I need to find a way to measure that with actual people in order to run a data analysis. Now, the fourth thing is relative parsimony or simplicity. A good theory should explain the data and be fairly simple and concrete. It shouldn't be huge and rambling. Fifth, practical utility. A good theory allows us to do something useful. It has policy implications, so that if we understand the theory and it's accurate, we'd be able, say, to prevent or reduce crime. And then last is plausibility. If you were to talk to a practitioner in criminal justice or somebody who knew about crime and delinquency, who dealt with it in his or her job, does it make sense to that person? Those are some of the aspects of a good theory that I think are important. Now, social control theory is one major criminological theory. It has a long history. We could trace its roots to the famous sociologist Emil Durkheim. Later on in the early 1900s, Ivan Nye, Walter Reckless, and ultimately in the late 1960s, Travis Hershey, who wrote the book A Control Theory of Crime. This theory is linked very closely with the rational choice perspective because it makes some assumptions about human nature. It assumes, for instance, that humans want to get things that benefit them. They're self-seeking and motivated to please themselves. It assumes something about the nature of humans. Now, the nature of humans is, according to this theory, that we're selfish, that we want instant gratification. The world revolves around ourselves. That's the natural state of humans, but through socialization, people can change. And so social control theories ask the question, why don't we all commit crime, rather than why we do? Their assumption is that we all probably would, if we could get away with it. Because they make an assumption about human nature. You know, as Bertrand Russell once said, selfishness is perfectly definite in a nursery. Kids, if given an opportunity to fight over something, generally will. If you put a bowl of ice cream in front of a bunch of 4-year-olds, they don't naturally share. In fact, they would rather have the whole thing for themselves. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of Hershey's theory, and specifically how he would explain crime with social control theory, from his book, The Causes of Delinquency. Hershey suggested that the reason people refrain from crime is due to the strength of a bond to society, and that this bond is composed of 4 distinct elements. And the stronger that bond is, the less likely crime will be. The first thing is attachment to significant others. Hershey argues that when people have deep and intimate relationships, they value these relationships. And he points out that crime jeopardizes relationships. And so a person involved in crime would likely have fewer friends or lose the friends that he has. Hershey's basic point then is when a person has these types of relationships, that crime is less likely. People who have fewer relationships are more free to deviate. And these relationships could be parents, teachers, peers, and so forth. As far as affiliation with negative influences, gangs, and whatnot, Hershey argues that that really isn't what he's getting at with attachment. In a criminal gang, he argues there really isn't attachment. It's all about profit motive and fulfilling an individual's desire. So he's talking about positive, strong, pro-social connections with people. That's the first element of the bond. The second is commitment. This is the rational element in a bond to society. It's what one would stand to lose by committing a crime. It could be the clothes on your back or the home that you own. It could be a reputation. People vary in how much they stand to lose by committing a crime. But people who have more invested, for instance, who own a home or who own a car, a job, people in that case, she argues, are less likely to deviate. They're less likely to engage in crime because they have a bigger stake in conformity. For instance, if you own a car and you're pulled over by the police with drugs in the car, you could lose that car under asset forfeiture laws. So people with more to lose are less likely to commit crime. The third element is involvement. Involvement is how busy a person is in conventional activities. And the argument here is that, well, as Hershey pointed out, idle hands are the devil's toolbox. People who are busy in pro-social activities simply have less time on their hands to get involved in crime because the day is limited. Even criminals have to sleep, they have to eat, they have things that they need to do which are not crimes. People involved more are in fact less likely to commit crime. The fourth and the final element in the bond to society is belief. Now, belief is the extent to which one agrees with the laws and rules of a society. And Hershey argues that this arises from early childhood socialization and is fairly well set by the time a person is an adult. And so a person has a set level of belief. A person who agrees more with the laws and rules of the society is less likely to want to violate those rules in order to avoid guilt, shame, and other negative feelings. So those are the 4 elements of the bond to society. And you'll notice, if you think about these, that some of them are, for example, attachment to others. That's probably a result primarily of growing up and socialization. Commitment, well, that varies. Some people have more things and some people have less. But again, it's tied into socialization. But it's easier to manipulate that. For example, programs like Habitat for Humanity that promote home ownership find that people who own a home are less likely to engage in deviant or criminal behavior because they have a greater stake in conformity. Much like if you were to take a tent in a windy area, the bigger the stakes are and the more they're ground into the ground, the less likely it is for that tent to just blow off. But if your tent is firmly in the ground, it's likely that it will stay there. And that's the case with crime and deviant behavior. Now let's talk a little bit about some of the policy implications of this theory, because research suggests that it's fairly well supported. In fact, it does explain crime. Now, one thing would be programs that increase bonding and pro-social attachments, like Big Brothers and Big Sisters programs. Any sort of a policy or program that encouraged especially young people to develop positive pro-social relationships. The idea, in fact, the prediction is that crime would be less under those circumstances. Now, what else? If we talk about, well, obviously about commitment, we talked about promoting home ownership, attachment, pro-social relationships, involvement. Programs like midnight basketball or after-school activities, science programs, sports, any program or policy that gets kids involved in pro-social activities and keeps them busier means they're less likely to commit crime. Because if you recall from subsequent lectures, and previous ones as well, is that crime is most likely to occur when people are between the ages of roughly 14 and 21, and it tends to peak around 17 or 18. And so in those times, crime it's really important to focus on crime when people are young, because that's the high peak offending age. And incidentally, that's probably one reason why Japan has a lower crime rate. Why? Because if you look at what is going on in the lives of people at that age, in that age category, they're quite busy. And so any program, policy, or society or culture that keeps young people busy is less likely to have crime. Well, other implications of this theory, well, I think one is to make sure that parenting is done well, because much of this idea and the theory is that a person's level of conformity, a person's stake in conformity and bond to society is fairly well set by the time a person is an adult. So prevention, of course, is a key. It is much easier to prevent a person from becoming delinquent than to intervene and solve the problem after he or she already is delinquent. And so prevention is going to be a key according to this theory. Now, research finds, as I have pointed out, that the theory is fairly well supported by the data. Now, there are many other criminological theories, but social control theory is the one that I wanted to comment on today. Thank you very much for listening to this video. Hope you all have a great day.